You think Common Ground is worth a buck? Consider leaving a tip at lptv.org. Lakeland Public Television presents Common Ground, brought to you by the Minnesota Arts and Cultural Heritage Fund.
My name is Laura Lear, and we are sitting in the Lika garden located in Ironton, Minnesota. Serbian Sisters has been in existence for 5 or 6 years, and one of our initial missions was to beautify Ironton. So we had a garden in mind. When our grandparents were here, there weren't formal gardens because they couldn't afford plants as such, so they would have little sprigs of flowers by the front door, and that was just about it. So we decided to put a little garden in Ironton to honor those people that were here.
When we put these together, this flagpole and directional sign is we picked cities in villages in the Croatia and Serbian area and Montenegro where people came from. So these were the small villages, in many cases, very tiny little hamlets where people were born, and then where they moved to and where they left to come to America from. So we see Gospic, that's where my grandpa boat departed to come to Ellis Island. Dunning Lepitz is like where he lived. We have Apatine on the other side, Privy Put, and Laura's family came from in that area. And so that's what we tried to do, so this was meaningful to people, where their parents or grandparents came from. And then the flags that we have flying represent 4 of the countries where people who are members of Serbian Sisters, their country. And so we have the Serbian flag, the Montenegrin flag, the Slovenian flag, and the Croatian flag. And several years ago, it's been probably about 6 years, we started an organization to honor the immigrants that came here, including our grandmothers, because they were all in a group called Serbian Sisters. And we wanted to honor that generation and the cultural aspects of their lives and the work that they did, because things have changed and it's no longer the same cultural community that it once was. And our grandparents and our grandmothers were all friends. And the organization that they belonged to, as I said, was Serbian Sisters. So we decided we would maybe try to have a little reunion. And we started out thinking we might have about 25 people who might come to the reunion, and 25 turned into 50 to 100 to 150. And on the day we had the reunion, we actually had over 200 people show up. So we knew that there was indeed still interest in the cultural aspects of the Balkan community, and we're Serbian, the 3 of us are Serbian, and so we decided that maybe we should honor that and form an organization, and decided to name it in honor of the original Serbian Sisters. And so then what could we do to make some community statement? And we came up with planting a Balkan memorial tree, which we did on the north end of Curtis Avenue, and we have a tree lighting at the holiday time for that. And then we decided to do a garden.
Serbian Sisters was organized in Belgrade, Serbia, and it was about 1910 or 11, after the First and Second Balkan Wars. And at that time, Serbia was war-ridden. The economy was battered. People were not in good shape. And so a group of women formed a community help organization called Serbian Sisters. And it was largely a benefit to the community. It wasn't politically organized, just a group of women who wanted to help people in less fortunate condition than they were. When the migration effort came to America at the turn of the century, a number of Serbian people came with, and with them their church. And with the church, the Serbian Sisters came, and they usually operated out of the church because the church was the focus of ethnic activity among Serbs. Serbian Sisters is not a religious organization. It happens to be Serbian. The people who belong to Serbian Sisters here, in the picture that we have, are from many ethnic faiths. Basically, Serbian Sisters was formed to help be a social help group to people in poor condition. In 1936, we had the Depression here. Things were real poor. And so Serbian Sisters was formed. It passed into oblivion, I think, probably in the 40s or 50s. We didn't know that there was one here. Several years ago, the school district had an all-class reunion, and we decided, well, let's have a Serb reunion. So we put the word out, and then Andrea, a photographer that she is, decided to collect old family pictures from the original immigrants. And this picture showed up. We'd never seen it before. And it was kind of an inspiration. At the all-class reunion, it was informal. It was at my house. We just put the word out that we're having a Serb reunion, and we had over 200 people come. And we found then there was an identified need that people still want to remember what happened here back in the 40s, 50s, and 60s. And so we formed our own Serbian Sisters, which was a cultural group. Our first mission, as I said, was to beautify Ironton. And from there on, we've moved to heritage. And the heritage of this area is mining for sure. But there were a lot of other miners besides Balkan people.
The group Serbian Sisters is actually not just Serbs. It is also Croatians and Italians and a lot of Balkan peoples that lived in the area here. So a lot of Austro-Hungarian Empire early in the 20th century then. People from that region were coming to Ironton, Minnesota to look for work. There were mines opening here pretty regularly. There was a lot of opportunity for people to kind of start new, get a home, live the American dream that we all have heard about. And in the 20th century, this was one of the places where they thought they could achieve it. And now that we are several generations into that, I think in the most part, successful American story, these ladies want to, again, celebrate and reflect the success of many of those immigrant families that came over here with the garden.
Many of the Serbian friends of like my parents remain friends for decades and really all their entire lives. And I think, number one, having come from an immigrant family situation, so they shared a culture. They shared, their parents had the language. Many of the people never learned, especially the women, did not necessarily learn to speak English because they didn't have to. They lived in an enclave of people who spoke the same language. They did not work outside of the home. Their husbands worked in the mines in most cases. So many of the women stayed more ethnic, I think, and more culturally centered. And then when their children went to school was many times the first time those kids really learned English. So my dad and my mom's generation were of such that they were bilingual because they had grown up to be Serbian speaking, and then when they went to school learned English. And then my generation, when we came along, was a situation where that was kind of the Americanization, and you did not want to necessarily think that you had some kind of an ethnic association. Everybody wanted to be an American, so there wasn't much encouragement to speak a language at home. So my generation did not learn the fluid language like my parents had, you know. So I think that was something with this common language. I think also the friendships were from the immigrant aspect, but then also from World War, the Depression was another tying type thing for the friendships. Everybody shared the poverty, and then World War II was something where people again shared the sacrifice, and so those friendships were formed on major life events and, you know, United States and world events. So I think that was a very tight-knit group, and I think that's why all of our parents were friends. So we are basically, my daughter now is friends with Lori's daughter, and so we're in the fourth generation of continuing a friendship. And we share Serbian Christmas together, which is, by the way, January 7th. And we also celebrate regular Christmas on December 25th. But we have made it a tradition for our three families to get together on Serbian Christmas.
Nothing!
And we have the traditional food. We have a traditional soup. We have traditional main dish. We have traditional desserts, which are like apple pavitica and walnut petitsa. And we really treasure that memory. And we actually put the pictures on Facebook, and people make comments about how they're really hungry for that. And actually, when we had our first reunion, we had our summer gatherings, we really encouraged people to bring ethnic recipes made from old family traditions and the things that they were remembering. So it might be something like a bean soup and a bean kupasan gra, is the name of the soup, and that's sauerkraut and beans, and that was a staple during the Depression. So everybody had that, and so that always brings a laugh when someone will bring kupasangra to the summer gathering.
History is a recording of all the events that has happened in mankind, on our human history, and there are pivotal points and all kinds of big things that happen, and we have history in school, but it seems as though history has fallen by the wayside in high school teaching. And I think perhaps it's because maybe kids don't find it relevant. They don't know, well, how do they fit into that? You know, and you can remember those dates that you're told to remember, but 2 years later you don't know about it because you don't have any framework to hang that on. So I am an historian, and so I am interested in that, but I'm not interested in every date that there ever was. But I am interested in the parts of history that I'm connected to. And I lived at a pivotal time here. The first half of the 20th century was the industrialization of America, and the place that I came from played a large part in that. One of the aspects of characteristics of our ore deposit here is that we have manganese. And during World War II, manganese was needed to make tanks. And World War II was progressing nicely, and Europe was blowing itself up, and it was running out of its own resources. And so FDR instituted a program called Lend-Lease. And we supplied Europe with fundamental materials to rebuild, and to fight an invading force. And one of the things that came out of the Cuyuna Range was the metal that built the tanks. I watch the military channel a lot, and they have a series on historic tank battles of World War II. And one I watched just last weekend was Kursk, the tank battle at Kursk. And that was when the Russians turned back the Germans on the German Eastern Front. They gave up. Now, so if Russia had been blown apart, where did they get the materials to meet the Germans on the field of battle? Well, they had a tank. They had 2 fleets of tanks for sure, and they met the Germans in Kursk, and it was a horrific battle. And Marshal Zhukov brought in a second tier of 300 tanks, and I saw those tanks flying across the steppes, the Russian steppes. And that was iron ore from Cuyuna. That was iron ore from here. That has meaning to me, and that's my heritage. So I will always remember that.
When I was growing up, one of the things that I really remember a lot is because we lived like a half a block from the post office. We had a lot of people stopping in on a daily basis my entire life. I lived with my grandparents as well. And every day of my life, people came by and stopped. People did not knock. No doors were locked. People would come in the back door, and if no one was home, they would walk through the entire house and walk out the front door. And I would be in my room sometimes, and I'd hear somebody coming in the back door, and my grandma or my mom wasn't going to be there, or wasn't there at the time, and I knew that they'd just walk right through the house, and I didn't have to even go out and say anything. So just the level of trust, and most of it was Serbian people, that there was just that level of comfortable camaraderie with people, and people feeling that you could open your house up, nobody would ever take anything, no one would ever violate anything. And so we always had a coffee pot on in the morning for when people went to get coffee, so ours was the main stop. So I saw many people all of my entire life on several times a week stopping in for coffee in the morning in particular. And my grandma too, never really became Americanized. And so when I was growing up, that was kind of that awkward time where after World War II and stuff, where you really wanted to be, quote, the American. And I remember coming home, and if I had someone with me, my grandma would say something to me in Serbian, and then I'd say, "Oh, Baba, I don't understand." And she knew, of course, that I understood perfectly what she had asked me or what she wanted or whatever, but it was just kind of not wanting to do it. But then later on, I really realized how I thought it was really an incredible gift to be able to have that cultural experience in America. So I feel that I really had kind of the best experience. A lot of people my age and our age and stuff really never had that kind of experience because they came from generations of people who had already been here. And so to really have a European experience firsthand, and of course I lived with my grandparents, so that was really that was a daily dose of firsthand European culture. And so then to go through the Americanization and being fortunate enough to, finish school, and, I graduated from the university and so forth. And so that, was just totally almost unheard of for those immigrants. And that's really what they wanted. They really valued education. They wanted their children to do better. And even though my dad and my uncles, were done with school in 8th grade, they wanted more for their kids. And had the Depression not been part of that, I think that, they would have been able to finish school and so forth. But there wasn't a pressure to finish school during the Depression, and when they needed workers and it was a source of income and there were mouths to feed, it was a whole different kind of thing. And now my niece, who wrote the poem Her Strength, has a PhD, and she teaches in Duluth. And so to go from grandparents that great-grandparents that she grew up with, not even basically my grandma not speaking much English, for her to be an English professor is just, really would have been such a fulfillment of a dream of those immigrant people who came and said, there's a place in America for my family. This poem was written by Magdalena Lubavitch. Her grandparents were Pera Vladitic and Mike Lubavitch, and she is the daughter of Barbara Cleaver and Stephen Lubavitch. She wrote this poem while she was in high school, and the name of this is Her Strength, and she is writing about her grandmother, Pera Lubavitch, and is called Baba, which is the Serbian name for grandma. These are the days that my Baba takes me down the narrow streets of Ironton. She gently touches my back, laughing.
Mi trebamo da idemo brzo.
With lips defined, her eyes dark as space, concealed by the night. We trudge block after block to visit the women of the old country. She has always been a steady tide, unchanged through time. She sailed from a foreign land, arrived on Ellis Island, where she walked across a wooden plank in 1912. 60 years later, I accompany her days. We drink coffee with women whose faces stay photographed inside the laughs, babushkas, stockings, and Turkish coffee. My Baba loves each of them, and so do I. Mrs. Ryasich, Mrs. O'Donovich, and Soka. I sit cross-legged and listen to stories spoken in their language. When night falls, we prepare for our journey across the neighborhoods with dim light. We pass by houses of American families. All the same they look to us. My Baba refuses to speak their language, will not accept their ways. They cannot penetrate her spirit. They can only watch as she glows proudly, Jean's rejoicing. We must go quickly.
If you have an idea for a common ground piece that pertains to North Central Minnesota, email us at legacy@lptv.org or call us 218-333-3022. To view any episode of Common Ground online, visit us at lptv.org. To order individual segments or entire episodes of Common Ground, please call 218-333-3020. Common Ground is brought to you by the Minnesota Arts and Cultural Heritage Fund with money from the vote of the people on the 4th of November, 2008.